Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Yu, and welcome back to TEAS Science Review. Today, we are going to look at the integumentary system. So integument refers to or means skin. So this system consists of mainly the skin, the largest organ in your body, and then some other structures, including the hair, right, and nails, and some accessory glands. Sebaceous gland, which is commonly known as oil gland, sudoriferous gland, that's commonly known as sweat gland. Just a real quick review on the functions of the skin. So first one, definitely protection, right? It protects you from injuries because you have multiple layers in the skin, and also forms a physical barrier to prevent the entry of foreign pathogens, right? So you don't get infections very easily. But if you get a cut, that provides opportunity for pathogens to enter your body and make you sick. It also prevents our body from drying out because you know that the internal environment of our body is very moist, right? Kind of like very watery like. So with the skin, you can keep that moisture inside. In fact, burn victims often face this problem. If they lose a lot of skin, it's very hard to keep them hydrated. The skin also protects us from UV radiation, so we're going to talk about that in detail later. The second main function, a very important function, is body temperature regulation, or we call it thermal regulation. Okay, thermal regulation. So that's achieved by two structures. Again, we'll provide a table for you to kind of learn how that works. Okay. Next function, excretion. So you might not realize this, but when you sweat, you actually get rid of some of the metabolic wastes. So sweat is mainly water, but also contains salts and minerals, mostly these three ions. I don't think you need to remember that, but just know that it's got ions, and this is why your sweat tastes a little bit salty, right? It's got sodium and chloride. Some other wastes include urea. We mentioned this a little bit from protein metabolism, lactic acid, and alcohol. So again, I don't think you need to remember these names, but just know that in addition to the main excretion system, the urinary system, your skin can also get rid of a little bit of the metabolic waste. Skin also produces a vitamin D, right, when you're exposed to sunlight and due to the UV light in sunlight. Additional functions, you have these sensory receptors and nerve endings in the skin, and this allows you to detect a pain, change in temperature, and pressure. So without those things, you can't really feel anything. Okay? So the skin is actually really important because you can detect all those things. It allows you to respond to the changes in the external environment to kind of protect yourself to survive better. Next, we're going to look at the structures of the skin. Now, the most important information here is the three layers of the skin. I've seen questions before on the layers of the skin. If you remember the terms, superficial and deep, right? Superficial and deep. So we are going to go from the most superficial layer to the deepest layer. The most superficial layer is called the epidermis. Now, by this point, you already know that derm, this refers to skin, right? Like dermatology. And so epi means kind of on the surface. So epidermis, that means the most superficial layer. So you can see that it's not very thick comparing to the next layer, dermis. So it's got multiple layers of epithelial tissue. And I'll show you a picture of what it looks like. But remember this, that in the skin, epidermis layer, the most superficial layer, is made up of epithelial tissue. All right, the next layer is dermis. As you can see, the dermis is a lot thicker than epidermis because there are a lot of structures in dermis. Now, dermis is mostly consists of connective tissue. So remember, this is not epithelial tissue anymore. So all these, the kind of salmon color, pink color, that's dermis. There are a lot of structures in dermis, as I mentioned. So let's go through them real quick. You definitely have a gland in dermis. So there we go, sweat gland. Okay. And usually you can see that there is a pore that opens to the surface of the skin, so the sweat will come out of the pores. Okay. All right, now in dermis, you also have those sensory receptors, as we talked about, right, and nerve endings. So this is an example of the sensory receptor. Now, don't worry about the name, but maybe remember this term corpuscle. So if you see this term in the test, it probably refers to some kind of sensory receptor. Okay, so this allows you to detect touch or pressure. All right, next sensory structure is these nerve endings. So you can see the yellow part, that's nerve endings. So this allows you to detect a pain. All right. Okay, next structure, hair follicles. So you also have these hair follicles in dermis. Right. And next structure is the other main gland in dermis, and this is the sebaceous gland. So a lot of times these sebaceous glands are associated with a hair follicle because they can secrete, oil into the hair follicle to kind of lubricate the hair. Okay. All right, next structure, erector pili. So you can see there's a little bit muscle right there. Now, erector pili is smooth muscle. Smooth. I know the color makes it look like you probably think about skeletal muscle, but you cannot consciously control it. It's a smooth muscle. So you use this muscle when it gets really cold, or if you are kind of scared, this muscle will contract and then it's going to pull the hair. So the hair is going to stand up. And this is what we know as a goosebump. Okay, I think that's, there's one more structure. In dermis, you also have some small blood vessels, right? You see that blue and red. So these are blood vessels, and usually they're pretty small, the capillary blood vessels in dermis. All right, that's the second layer. The deepest layer is called hypodermis. So hypo means low, right? The opposite would be hyper. Hyper means high. So hypodermis is a below dermis or deep to dermis. Now in this layer, you mostly have blood vessels right here. See again the red and blue, and adipose tissue. So you see these big yellow kind of structures. So these are adipose tissue. Okay, there we go. So adipose just means fat. Now the adipose tissues can definitely cushion, right? If you get physical blow on your skin, it can cushion, and also it makes your skin plump. Right? When we age, we start to lose adipose tissue along with the collagen fibers in our skin, and this is why you develop wrinkles. All right. Next, I want to focus on two interesting. One is a protein, the other is a protective pigment. So keratin. If you buy, let's say, hair shampoos or conditioners, you probably see this term. So keratin is a fibrous protein that gives dermis its durability and protective capabilities. Now, keratin is also found in hair and nails. Okay, so basically, keratin is a very tough protein that can be very protective of the underlying structures. So this is why your skin can be protective, because the cells contain keratin. And then the derivative structures like hair and nails, they also have keratin. I want to show you a picture of what epidermis looks like. So this whole thing is epidermis. So again, that's the darker part, that's all epidermis. So let me ask you this question. What's down here? What's the layer below epidermis? That's dermis, right? So that's dermis. And then over here, that's dermis. So you can see that epidermis contains multiple layers of very tightly kind of packed cells. So, and those cells have a lot of keratin as well, so they can be very protective. All right, next structure, melanin. So melanin is a pigment that protects the cells from UV light. So what happens is UV light, ultraviolet A, UVA, UVB, they have a lot of energy, so they can definitely penetrate the cell. Now, when they penetrate the cell, they can damage DNA, which is found in the nucleus. So how do we protect ourselves from UV damage? Because we don't want the DNA to be damaged, and then the cell may have mutations which lead to cancer cells, right? This is how skin cancer happens. So what we do is we have these very dark pigment. You can actually see in this picture, see this kind of brown dark colors. That's where you find melanin. Okay, so that's where the melanin is concentrated. So the melanin forms kind of almost like an umbrella over the cells, so it can absorb UV light, so that UV light doesn't get into the cell and damage the DNA. Okay, so melanin, the amount of melanin in your skin determines your skin color. So if you have a darker color, that means your skin contains more melanin. If you have a spot that have a concentrated melanin, that forms freckles. Okay, so that's also just an interesting fact. Thermoregulation. So your skin is involved in regulating your body temperature. Another system that does that, remember, is a skeletal muscle. When your skeletal muscle contracts, it generates heat, right? So that also helps you regulate body temperature. So how does skin do it? It's mostly through these two structures, sweat glands and blood vessels. Now, sweat gland is pretty straightforward, so I'm going to focus on blood vessels. Now, blood vessels transport blood, right? So you have a blood in there. Now, one thing you may not know is that blood carries heat. It carries heat. So I have a feet. My feet are always cold, no matter, it's winter or summer. So my husband always kind of jokes about my cold feet, and he would say they're like icicles, and you don't have very good circulation. So that's kind of true, because if you have good circulation, blood carries heat, you wouldn't have cold body parts. So if you remember from the previous picture, you do have all these blood vessels in dermis, right? Okay. So what happens when you get really hot? Okay, so that condition is called hyperthermia. Remember, hyper means high. That's when your body, is kind of heating up. Your body is getting too warm, right? So your blood vessels will dilate. Okay, blood vessel gets wider. Okay, so it gets wider. It's dilating. So when it's dilating, if it gets bigger, that means you have more blood going through the blood vessel, right? So more blood, more heat they can carry. So the blood is going to carry all that excess heat into your body surface, right? Close to, or in your skin, close to the external environment. So that's going to release the heat, the excessive heat. Okay? So when the heat dissipates, then your body cools down. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if your body is kind of cold, hypothermia, right? Hypo means low. Then your blood vessels will constrict. So there's less blood going through the blood vessels in your skin. So you lose less heat from dissipation, less blood. There you go. All right, so you can just go through this table. If you have hyperthermia, then your goal, right, is to cool down the body. So this is your response, cooling the body. So of course you're gonna sweat more, right? And then, remember, your blood vessels are going to dilate, right? So you have more blood flushing, kind of going to the surface, to your body surface. And then when heat dissipates, you cool down. And then when you have hypothermia, you do the opposite. Okay, last quick recap on structures and functions of the skin. So protection, we talk about all of them. So many layers of cells and tissues, epithelial tissue in epidermis, right? Epidermis, and then connective tissue in dermis. Keratin, very tough, fibrous protein, right? It makes your skin very kind of durable, right? And resistant to kind of physical damage. Melanin protects your body from UV radiation. Another thing we didn't really talk about is the skin also kind of forms a chemical barrier as well, in addition to the physical barrier. That's because of all the secretion from your skin contains chemicals that can inhibit bacterial growth. Okay, so that's the chemical barrier. Next function, regulating body temperature. So remember, it's achieved by the sweat gland or sturiferous gland and dilation and the constriction of blood vessels. Secretion, we talk about the main things that you can find in the sweat. Okay, and then in sebaceous gland, it secretes sebum. Sebum that can lubricate your skin and your hair. One thing I want to point out is that just in case there's a question on that, so when you look at the sweat gland, there are actually two types of sweat gland, acrine gland and apocrine gland. So the acrine gland can be found all over your body. So they're the kind of normal sweat glands. The apocrine gland is a special sweat gland that's usually found in the axillary area. You may know this, axillary area really just means your armpit. The other area that you can find apocrine gland is the genital area. Okay. So what's special about the apocrine gland? The secretion, besides all those things that you can find in normal sweat, water, salts, urea, lactic acid, it also has a lot of proteins and fat. All right, so what happens is initially it doesn't smell bad, it's odorless, but over time bacteria starts to break down these molecules, and that's what's gonna cause the bad odors. So that's why people use a deodorant, right? They apply deodorant to the armpits. You can't really do it to the genital area, but those two areas are where you can find the apocrine gland. We talk about vitamin D production, and then the additional kind of sensory function. All right, now let's do some practice. I have some good questions about the integumentary system. Question 1. Okay, so this question asks you to range the layers from the deepest layer outward. So the deepest layer is going to be a hypodermis, right? Remember, hypo means below. And then the next one is dermis, and the most superficial layer is epidermis. All right, question 2. This is an easy question, right? So as long as you know that sweat gland is also known as sturiferous gland, then you can get the correct answer. Question 3. So this is about thermoregulation, right? When your body gets too cold, you want to save all the heat, right? You don't want to lose any heat. So you want to constrict the blood vessels so there's not too much blood going to your skin, to your body surface. So you can retain the heat. So correct answer is C. Question 4 is similar. Question 2, 3, it asks about the thermoregulation. Okay, so there are 2 correct answers. So when you vigorously work out, your body's gonna get too hot, right? So you are definitely gonna sweat, because when the sweat evaporates, because it's mostly water, right? When the water evaporates, it's gonna take heat away from your body. The other answer is going to be dilation, right? Dilation of blood vessels. So you will have more blood going into your skin, to your body surface, and when the blood is close to the body surface, heat can dissipate, right? That takes heat away from your body. Okay, question 5. Epidermis is composed of epithelial tissue, right? So what if I change this question to dermis? To dermis, what will be the answer? Connective tissue. Right. Question 6. You probably guessed the answer because we did not cover this in the review, and also I don't see this information covered by most of the study manuals. This question asks about the different levels of burns, right? So a first-degree burn involves which of following layers of skin. So just by logic, there are 3 degrees, 3 levels of burn. So you can kind of, by logic, guess that first degree would be the least severe, and then the third degree will be the most severe. So the least severe will involve the least amount of skin being damaged, right? So as long as you know the different layers of the skin, you can kind of compare the different options. So A, epidermis only. So you know epidermis is the most superficial layer. So compared to B and C, this is the least damaged level among all the answers. And B, epidermis and the part of a dermis. So that means the burn goes a little bit deeper, right? It extends into the dermis part. And then C is even worse. Now involves all of the dermis. So this is first degree, this is a second degree, and this is a third degree. Okay. And D, that's really, really bad, right? If the burn goes down all the way to the muscle and bones. So the correct answer is A. And in fact, sunburn usually is classified as first-degree burn, epidermis only. Okay. All right, just wanted to point out a typo in the official study manual. So on page 120, sweat is produced by sudoriferous gland, not sebaceous gland. All right, good job. You just completed another lesson.